Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. Yes, good. Right. Yes, so my name is Mike, and I am a 2025 SSI Fellow looking for ways to support better mental health in the research software community. What a time I picked to be doing such a thing. As part of my SSI Fellowship, what I've been trying to do is to continue the conversation around mental health in the research software community. And to do that today, I would like to share a couple of stories with you. First is the story of, let's say, how I became interested in supporting mental health. And the second is the story of how I came to apply for the SSI Fellowship, what I've been up to so far, and what my plans are for the future. Before I dive in, I just want to say I will be mentioning some difficult topics during this conversation. I do briefly discuss anxiety attacks and mention suicide, mainly in the context of discussing mental health statistics. I'm going to try and keep this as light as possible, but we are dealing with some fairly heavy subjects, so I will not be offended if people do need to excuse themselves. Remember, we have got quiet room and there are mental health first aiders around if anyone needs support. So with that said, let me take you back in time. When my wife and I discovered that we were going to become parents for the first time, we were of course nervous, but delighted and excited. And because of who I am as a person, even before we could start sort of talking to our friends and family about these things, I sort of started diving down a rabbit hole of research, trying to work out what the hell I was going to be doing over the next few months. And I quickly discovered that there's a lot of useful information out there, but there's not a lot of stuff out there that's really aimed at dads about what it's like to become a father. Certainly not the sort of stuff that I wanted to read, with a few notable exceptions. So on the night that we announced that my wife was pregnant, I published my first blog post. I promised that I would talk about all of the sort of experiences, all of the rituals that we'd gone through with all the scans and everything. I also promised to share quite a lot of the sort of interesting information that I'd learned along the way about all of the fascinating and disgusting things that were going on in my wife's body. It was meant to be a frank and honest but light-hearted chronicle of what it was like to be an early millennial becoming a father. And that was how it continued for the next few months, until we were making the final preparations to welcome my son into the world in April 2020. My son was born about 2 weeks into the first national UK lockdown, and suddenly we were facing a lot of other stresses and confusion on top of everything else that was already going on. I did continue with the blog, but it became more of a lockdown parenting blog, and I ended up talking about all sorts of things that I didn't intend to originally talk about, including mental health reasons that will become obvious in a moment. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but we were facing the prospect of doing it very much on our own. I mean, we had Marvin, but he wasn't a huge amount of help. Those first few weeks were particularly difficult. We discovered that my wife had developed mastitis and anemia, and that my son had come out with a broken collarbone, something that we only discovered a few weeks in when we had to rush him to hospital in the middle of a pandemic. It was a really difficult and challenging time, and we had no idea that any of the symptoms they were experiencing were anything other than normal, and we had no one to talk to. It was fun. The university very graciously gave us some extended parental leave, so I had a bit more time to take off to look after them in the beginning, but eventually I had to go back to work, and so on top of doing all of that, I had to keep 2 PIs and my boss happy. Things then got a little bit easier over the summer as things opened up and we were able to form bubbles, go around for garden visits, remember those? But then in the autumn, lockdown started to come back into force, and I found myself teaching Programming 101 on a master's course, effectively, something that I was not entirely prepared for. I spent 8 50-hour weeks preparing material, recording, editing and uploading videos, creating online stuff and being around to support the students. And that was only supposed to be 50% of my time. I was working on another project, which then started to fall behind. And by this point, I was mentally, physically exhausted. I was burnt out, but I couldn't really take a step back from my home responsibilities or from looking after the students. They were arriving and there was no one else to sort of cover for me. And I sort of got through it, but by that point, as I say, I was burned out. And it wasn't long after that that all of these various pressures that have been building up on me for so long became too much to bear. And I did what I think any sensible person would do in that situation, which was sit on the floor in the corner of my office, hugging my knees and hyperventilating for about 2 hours. As a result of that anxiety attack, I had to take a chunk of time off work. I had to give up all of my sort of additional responsibilities. And it's taken me a lot of time, a lot of hard work to recover from that. A lot of expensive therapy as well, to recover from that, both sort of mentally, physically, and professionally as well. It's one of the most difficult things I've sort of ever been through in my life, and something that is quite hard for me to talk about even now. So you might wonder why the hell I am standing here talking to you about it. And there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think it is important to continue the conversation around mental health, particularly in the workplace, and I will talk more about that in a moment. But I also came to realize that while what happened was nobody's fault, everyone did the best they could in difficult circumstances, and probably the situation couldn't really be avoided. I still think there are things that we can learn from my experience and from the experience of others that will hopefully mean that no one else has to go through the same sort of things that I went through. And so that was my motivation for applying for the SSI Fellowship, to try and do something to support better mental health in the research software community. Now, normally at this point I'll explain who the SSI are. I hope I don't need to do that to this audience, but if you want to learn more about the SSI and the Fellowship Programme, go and talk to them at their desk. They are wonderful, friendly people, and I'm not just saying that because they're paying for me to be here. You'll have heard Kirsty's lightning talk yesterday. The one thing I would add to that is, yes, we are expected to be ambassadors for good practice in RSE, but there are also so many sort of related projects, sort of digital humanities projects and things like mental health that the SSI supports, and being a fellow has been a great experience. So please do go and talk to the people on the stand. I will be on the SSI stand after this session if anyone wants to talk about the fellowship or anything else. So I knew I wanted to apply for the fellowship, and I knew I wanted to do something to support better mental health in our community. But then that sort of raises the question of, okay, what can we do? And because of who I am as a person, I ended up going down a rabbit hole of research. And immediately you sort of come across some of the big headline statistics around 1 in 4 adults in England are expected to experience a mental health problem each year. In England, I believe those are problems severe enough that you have to take time off work or seek medical intervention, which gives you an idea of the sort of scale of the problem at national level. And you quickly start to see statistics about how obviously members of the LGBTQ+ community and people with disabilities and from minority groups suffer from certain problems more frequently than their counterparts. This gives you an idea of the sort of breadth and scale of the problem that we are facing. But one of the statistics I encountered that obviously resonated with me and that I wanted to mention today, as it is International Suicide Prevention Day, I think, is this fact that while women are more likely to report experiencing suicidal thoughts, men are 3 times more likely to take their own lives. Suicide is still the leading cause of death among men under the age of 50, which is a terrifying and depressing statistic, and something that I hope I can do something to erode by doing these kind of activities. So that information is both sort of scary, but also it sort of encouraged me to get involved, because obviously there is something we need to do about all this stuff. But maybe tackling things at a national level is beyond what I will be capable of doing. So okay, we can focus our attention on the research software community. Unfortunately, we have some very good data from Dave, who conducted a survey into mental health in the RSE community a couple of years ago. The results are not quite ready to publish yet. Dave was very busy running RSECon last year and doing various other things, but it has allowed me to share a preview of some of the sort of headline facts from our initial analysis of that data today. And of the people who responded to that survey, roughly half said that they had experienced some sort of mental health issue since coming into this profession. And you can see the high prevalence, particularly of anxiety and stress, all slightly above that sort of 1 in 4 statistic that we've mentioned earlier. And we can dig a little bit deeper into that and look into some of the causes of stress and anxiety. And it will come as no surprise to the RSEs in the room to see things like context shifting, difficult PIs, and lack of recognition being up quite high on that list. And if we look at the sources of other negative feelings that people have experienced, we also see some of the symptoms of imposter syndrome showing up on that list. I think there are some challenges that are unique to the research software community that we need to sort of try and tackle head on as much as we can. A lot of good work has been done. As Simon said this morning, we've come a long way in a very short space of time with the RSE Society, the SSI, and this sort of amazing community with pushing particularly recognition of RSE forward. But I still think there's more work that we can do to try and avoid this situation where sort of potentially these mental health issues are leading to people leaving this profession. There's a lot of reasons to leave this profession, particularly at the moment, but maybe we can do something to make sure that mental health isn't one of them. And so I was like, right, okay, I'm going to apply for fellowship, and I under this sort of headline back of, we want to make research software more sustainable, we have to help sustain the people writing the software too, which is a very good slogan that I was quite smug about, but it still doesn't actually answer the question, what can we practically do? There are certain things that are going to be beyond my pay grade, things that I can't change and affect. I can't make your boss give you more money or less work, but I also don't want to be the guy who says, hey, you look stressed, have you tried yoga? Or your team is on the verge of burning out, have you considered throwing a pizza party? That'll fix everything. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to get punched in the face. So I'm trying to work out what can we practically do to improve mental health amongst RSEs. And I think one of the main things we can do, apart from the reason I'm here, is continue the conversation. I think we need to break down the stigma around discussing mental health issues, particularly in the workplace. I think there is a role that self-care can play in this, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but we want to give people the tools to help look after themselves. I also think, as I said, at the RSE leaders meeting on Monday, that there is a role that leaders and line managers have to play in managing the mental health of their teams and creating an environment where people are able to raise issues and concerns and trying to do something about those concerns and providing the support they can. And the reason I think this is really important is because I think it is almost always better to intervene early to prevent issues from becoming problems than it is to try and fix the problems afterwards. Or I'll say the biggest sort of quote, which has got slightly misformatted from thing I want to get across is, it is better to raise a red flag before you're forced to wave a white one, and you can't read what it says, but it is a white flag that you're I really do think that it is better to intervene early and try and stop these issues becoming problems. And to do that, we need to be more open and have these conversations and provide support, which is all well and good. And it definitely is something that we should be doing, but I also acknowledge that it can be difficult to talk to your colleagues and to your line manager or to a room full of strangers about your mental health. There is definitely this sort of sense that it can be perceived as a sign of weakness, or something that will affect your career. But I would say that I don't think people with mental health issues are weak. I don't think I am weak. Yes, I burned out, I had an anxiety attack, and I felt pretty rubbish about myself at the time. But I've come to sort of realize that given the situation that I was put in, I think I handled myself remarkably well. I delivered on all of that teaching material. I got exemplary feedback on it. And I think I am only resilient and able to do that because of my previous experiences with mental health. And I think having that resilience on your team is a benefit, not a weakness. And also having people around with that kind of experience can help you look out for the warning signs and help people get support and help when they need it. Yes, and if the fact that we should be doing the right thing to help support our fellow human beings hasn't swayed you, let us consider the financial implications. I can't remember how long I was off for during lockdown, but let's say I was off for 6 weeks. That is 30 working days. Based on our current day rate, I estimate my absence would cost the university around £12,000, which is not an insubstantial amount of money. And to give you an idea of the sort of intervention that you might put in place to prevent this, I have trained as a mental health first aider, which means I am trained to help if someone is having an anxiety attack. I can help sort of calm them down a bit. It's still like being a regular first aider. You're not expected to sort of fix the person, but to sort of pick them up and pass them on to the right form of support, but also advocate for better mental health. Again, watch out for the warning signs, approach people and signpost them to additional help and support. Now, that mental health first aid training costs £325. And even if you factor in the 2 days off someone would have to take to do that work, you can train a mental health first aider for a little under £1,200. And call me crazy, but I think that if you can spend £1,200 to prevent £12,000 from being lost, then that is a sound investment, not only in the well-being, but in your team, and something that could actually pay off in the long run. And don't just take my back of the BMAT calculations for it. We also have data from Mental Health First Aid England, which suggests 72 million working days are lost in the UK each year, costing the economy £45 billion. I'm going to leave that statistic in the air for around and let you wonder why we are not investing more in mental health services, but I promise I'll go on a political rant. So there is a problem that we need to tackle, and I think continuing the conversation is an important way to do that. But is there anything else that we can practically do to support mental health? How do we go about sort of getting this information out there and helping people with various different things? This was a question that I sort of struggled to answer for quite a long time, but I started to put some ideas together as I went through various sort of preparations for the fellowship. One thing that I encountered during my mental health first aid training was this idea of a stress container. Now, this was a visualization that I hadn't really seen before. You can imagine you've got a sort of a bucket or a barrel, and there's constantly stress dripping into that container. And unfortunately, because life, you can't always control or stop that stress from dripping into the container. But what you can do is make sure that the container doesn't overflow, because that's when problems occur. And the way to do that is using healthy coping mechanisms to turn a little tap and let the water out so that it doesn't overflow. I think this is quite a good illustration that I say I have never really encountered before. And it's also one that shows the importance of self-care in this sort of equation of supporting better mental health. I think this is also quite a good visualization because it's easy to sort of extend it and imagine everybody will have their own different sizes and shapes of containers with stress from different sources, and will have different coping mechanisms. Okay, so one of the things that we can do is to try and support self-care. So what about sharing practical tips and advice for that? And I can do that. So I could tell you that, for example, if I have thoughts that are spiraling around in my head for days on end and they're distracting me and keeping me awake, I find writing about them in a sort of structured way, as if I'm writing an essay or a blog post or something, really helps get them out of my head and onto the page. And sometimes it can even help me sort of come to a sort of conclusion and move on from these things. I found out that sort of some traditional journaling and other stuff that therapists suggested didn't really work for me, but this really did. And I say I've written blog posts and a few sort of short stories about my experience, which has been really helpful for me. I can also tell you recently that I got into this spiral that we've sort of discussed before, about not feeling productive enough. Like, I haven't done enough work today, therefore I'm going to spend some time this evening catching up on work, which means that tomorrow I will be tired and not rested and I won't get enough done, which will then mean that I feel I have to catch up on more work. And I got into this sort of spiral of not relaxing and the situation just getting worse. And the thing that I worked on with my therapist was this idea of not just sort of closing off issues when you've completed them, but taking time to reflect on them, thinking about why it took longer than expected and what went wrong is useful for sort of changing that narrative in your head and understanding why things took as long as they did. But you can also take that narrative in a more positive direction by reflecting on also what went right and what did you learn from the experience. And this was a really useful tool that has helped me sort of get through that sort of difficult phase I was having earlier this year. However, I'm very aware that that advice is probably not going to work for everyone. It might work for 10% of the people in this room, or 10 people, or one person, and it's still worth sharing if it helps that one person. But I think we need to go beyond that to look for something that's going to have a bigger impact. I was looking for something that would make every RSE in the UK happier somehow, with only £4,000 and 15 months to do it. But I don't think that that is actually the solution. I don't think there is a single magic bullet thing that we can do to make everyone healthier and happier. So I was still struggling with this question of, well, what is the solution? And it started to sort of crystallize a bit last year when I attended the collaborations workshop. Again, this is a brilliant event run by the SSI, which I would encourage you to attend if you can. It's another highlight of the year, as well as RSECon, it's right up there. And I was at the collaborations workshop, and we got into a group and we were talking about our sort of plans and ideas. And I mentioned I wanted to support mental health, but wasn't sure how. And somehow we got into a conversation where someone mentioned that they had been using these productivity frameworks, task management tools, whatever you want to call them, to help manage their own workload, but actually that had been really helpful and really useful for them. Now, my initial reaction to this was a sort of very negative sort of, because my experience of these tools is often bad managers bringing them in to try and get more work out of me. I'm definitely someone who suffers from post-traumatic scrum disorder. But the conversation continued, and a few other people said that they'd been using these tools too, and that they had really helped them to sort of manage their workload. And it means that by managing your workload more effectively, you can switch off and go home at the end of the day and have a life outside of work, which is really important for your mental health and well-being. So we created this idea. I don't know where I was when this photo was taken or why I'm just floating head. We created this idea, task management for humans and self-care, which was a course that would introduce a range of these different tools, but in that context of what is the value for you, not what is the value for your employer, and how it can help you manage your workload, have better life-work balance, that sort of thing. This idea went on to win top prize for the idea session on day 2, and then won the top prize for the hack day on day 3, which I think shows that people understand that mental health is important and they're willing to support these kind of projects. Yeah, the other thing that I would say, should say, is that I think if you can do something that will help support the mental health and life-work balance of your team, it will lead to them being more productive. But I don't think you can just skip straight to that final step without considering that important sort of middle step of what are you doing it and who is it for. So yes, this is an example of a project that, again, is probably more useful to people with neurodiversity, anxiety, ADHD. So again, it's supporting perhaps a subset of the community rather than the community as a whole. I think if we can support a lot of projects like this, then it will have greater impact. And it's also an example of a project that emerged spontaneously out of a conversation that we had during the community. So I decided that one of the things that I'm going to do is travel around giving this talk, talking to people, having conversations, asking questions, and trying to work out what the sort of biggest challenges facing our community are and what we can do to try and address them. So I say I've been doing a world tour of mostly England and Zoom, trying to get this conversation going and try and see if we can spawn any more ideas. And I just wanted to sort of briefly talk about some of the common themes that seem to come up a lot. So the first question that always seems to come up is, how do we deal with imposter syndrome? There are, as RSEs, we are expected to be unicorns. They don't pay us enough for this. And we often have to walk into a room full of very bright people who know a lot of things about something that we know nothing about, and contribute to that project. And there is an element of fake it till you make it, sort of go in there, be confident, and you will learn how to deal with that situation. But there are also techniques that you can learn for, again, it's about controlling that narrative in your own head and making yourself realize that you deserve to be at that table and that you have something to contribute. So, right, okay, imposter syndrome is a current problem. We're going to start piling some advice about that. I was encouraged to see people asking the question of what can I do to support my team. This was in a group that included admin and HR people, as well as RSEs and leaders. And I think the most important thing that you can do is try and listen to people when they raise these concerns and do what you can to support them. I do accept that it's not always possible to move deadlines and resources around to support someone who is struggling, but you should still sort of take these concerns seriously and try and do what you can to address them. The worst thing that you can do is to ignore them and make that person feel like you've dismissed their concerns and aren't taking them seriously, because that will only serve to tank their mental health further. And then tangentially related to this, unfortunately, this is often in the context of my line manager is unwilling or unable to help. Where can I go to get additional support? That is a very good question, and we've been compiling some information on this. So we have a nice shiny leaflet, which is available at the SSI and Society stands if you want to read it or take it back to your teams. But on that, we include various information, including where to go and who to talk to if you're struggling. And the thing that I sort of like to draw attention to on this is the employee assistance program. Most universities and institutions have something like this, where they pay a third party to provide medical and mental health services. you can usually get sort of half a dozen free counselling or therapy sessions through them, and various other forms of support as well. They are probably not going to fix the problem, but they might at least help you with diagnosis and getting you started on your journey. And not a lot of people know that those services exist, so we're trying to sort of promote them and draw attention to them. And we are generally sort of trying to collect all of this information together, and we are putting the information together onto a website, which we have called ConveRSE, because there are increasingly short list of words that have RSE in them that are not already taken. I'm looking at you, Discourse, for stealing my initial idea. And the idea is that this will be a hub for mental health and information and support, aimed primarily at RSEs, but also extendable to RTPs, PhD students, and RAs, and potentially software developers in other industries as well. And we've got that focus on continuing the conversation, as well as various sort of curated resources that we're including. So we will have the results of Dave's survey on there and discussions about what some of that means, as well as some tips for looking after yourself, your team, your colleagues, and links, which are also on the leaflets to other charities, Samaritans and Mind, and other sorts of services that you might want to get in contact with. But the thing that I would like to ask for your help with is that we want to include a blog on this website. And the idea is that we are encouraging people to share all sorts of things, but we're interested in people who are willing to share their mental health stories. I realize this is a daunting prospect. We have the option to do this anonymously if you prefer. But by sharing our stories and experiences, I think it can help people feel seen and to realize that they're not alone, and maybe help them reach out and get support. We're also interested in any resources, projects, and communities that already exist that support mental health that might be relevant to other people in the research software community. And general tips and advice for looking after yourself and staying sane in the workplace. That QR code will take you to the link. We have not yet found a permanent home for the website yet, but any feedback and any contributions would be greatly appreciated. I'll post the link on Slack afterwards. See a few friends. We'll wait a couple of seconds. So yeah, if you are willing to contribute, or if your teammates and colleagues are willing, particularly people who are passionate about EDI and mental health, we would love to get people involved. I think if we can collect submissions from as wide and diverse an audience as possible, then it will really help to maximize the impact of that site. And I would also like to ask for your help directly now, if this works. So I have set up Mentimeter, which I will switch to. QR code will be on the slides as well. I hope this works. No. Things are happening. I think that's happened. Right, that'll do. I am seeing some things, which I think means that this is working. So yeah, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. The first question is a relatively easy question to answer, but is the slightly more negative of the two questions. And that is, what do you feel are the biggest challenges? The QR code is still on the screen if you need it. What do you feel are the biggest challenges, the biggest barriers to good mental health in the workplace? Before I begin, yes, I would say results are anonymous, so feel free to post whatever you like within reason. But please avoid including any personal information. And I shouldn't have to say this, but I do. Please keep it clean. It's on a big screen. It's being recorded and broke up. So yeah. Should it be working? Is that working? Why is... Aha. Things are appearing. This is good. Yes. So there's the context switching and imposter syndrome. Yes, of course, are fairly common. I don't want to devalue any of these comments, by the way. These are serious issues. It's just things that we've seen quite a lot of. Well, back here, scroll through. Yes, issues with poor management, context switching. Yeah, seeing a lot of familiar themes here. Yeah, again, so we are often expected to split between multiple projects, and the context switching and moving, shifting deadlines. Yes, saying a few things about lack of recognition. A few choice comments about management and leadership. Yes, okay. And yes, as you will know from my story, I can appreciate that the home life situation can have a big effect on that as well. And yes, the effect on the LGBT, well, LGB in particular at the moment, T communities. Okay, I will leave that open for a few more minutes, but I say I'll give you an idea. Again, a lot of familiar themes, a lot of things that we are focusing on, trying to bring together advice and support to help those. In the interest of time, I am going to move on. That's okay. To the more difficult question, but also potentially the more useful one, which is, do you have any tips or advice or experience of things that are good for your mental health in the workplace? What do you do to look after your own mental health? Do you have anything that your line manager, your colleagues have done that helps support the mental health and boost the morale of your team in the workplace? Move on. Hopefully things will start to. First one is pub, of course it is. Again, this is a much harder and more difficult question to answer, and there are a range of solutions to this. So, I mean, there are the more serious things like having policies in place and arranging one-to-one meetings so that you can keep on top of these things, all the way through to the Newcastle RSE team has what I think is now an infamous biscuit tournament that we've been running over the last few months, where every week a couple of people bring in their favourite biscuit and they face off against each other, and we have votes. There is, of course, a spreadsheet. A lot of graphs have been produced from the spreadsheets. Machine learning has even been done on the spreadsheet, because why not? I think that's been quite a good team building exercise. It certainly brought people team together and got them discussing things, although whether it's been a source of more arguments or not, I don't know. But it can be good or frivolous things. Spotting craft club there, which is quite a good one I found, doing craft activity, building Lego sets and other sort of things is really useful. Yeah, getting outside and seeing nature. Other things. Humour for the pub, always a popular solution. Interesting. Yep, we've done a few sort of sporting activities. So this is the sort of question that I think is useful and that we want to collect together and publish about how we can do things to boost mental health. Yeah, I think part of the reason the biscuit competition was successful is that we had some designated coffee breaks each week where people could get around to meet up and discuss it. That worked really well. What we talked about sort of faith and socials and getting the people into the office together. It's very good, very interesting. So I'm going to try and leave this open so that people can continue to add stuff. I will be doing some follow-up sort of blog posts and stuff talking about some of this data, pulling it together and seeing if we've got any sort of popular solutions that we can share. If anyone is willing to talk more about their experiences, if someone is preparing a blog post about how we ran the biscuit tournament, we would love to include that sort of stuff on the website as well. So I'll try and leave that presenting so hopefully people can continue to add to it. But I will spoilers. There we go. Okay. Yes, so all that really remains to be said is that if you want to join in with the ConveRSE project and keep the conversation going, we have a mental health channel which we've set up on the RSE Slack workspace, which you can join. We do have a ConveRSE mailing list, which a few people have signed up to. I haven't sent anything out yet, but we'll keep you updated with new blog posts, content updates on the website, and that sort of thing. You can follow me on the SSL social media. I did not get around to adding the links to those before I submitted my slides, but never mind. And yes, if you go to the ConveRSE website, there are links on there to the GitHub repository. If you're that way inclined, you can contribute directly to it. It's a Jekyll site, so you can contribute by a pull request, or we have some forms for submitting blog posts and other content for the website. I think then all that really remains to be said is thank you very much for listening. Remember to take regular breaks and stay hydrated and get fresh air, although I suspect most of you learned that lesson the hard way yesterday. Take care of yourselves, and thank you very much for listening. I nearly forgot my most important contribution to the RSE community. There are some laptop stickers on the desks as well.
Thank you, Mike. It was great seeing lots of really positive responses coming in on the slide I was talking. Thank you very much for coming and talking about this important topic. There are some questions as well. Have you found that being a mental health first aider and having that training helps you manage your own mental health as well? How do you look after yourself when confronted with others' mental health problems? Yes,
that is a very good question. As I say, there were things that I encountered during the training, like that sort of stress container idea that I'd not encountered before. That was a good sort of way of visualizing things. And there was some other sort of useful information about where to go to get support. So I think that has been useful. Yeah, it is a tricky one to look after yourself when you're also trying to look after others. That's one of the things they do teach you how to do, and it's a lot of common sense stuff and a lot of things that I keep telling people, like staying hydrated, getting fresh air, taking breaks, that sort of thing. Advice that I'm not very good at following. I think I do. At CW25, had to excuse myself because I had a headache because I hadn't been hydrating myself and following my own advice. But I did have a few conversations with a few different people who were struggling and was able to help them. And yeah, it's a tricky balance, but I think the training really did help me, and I knew that I was going to be having a lot of conversations with people about mental health as a result of this, so I thought it was a useful skill to have.
Thank you. What can we change about the RSE role within teams to minimize context switching and wearing of too many hats?
That's a very good question, and I think it's sort of, I would say it depends on the individual. So I think we've had this conversation a couple of times in the Newcastle team, and I think there are people who are generally quite happy to work on two projects and be able to have things to switch to and focus on different days, rather than they would prefer to do that rather than working on one project the whole time. But there are other people who I think have struggled with that, maintaining that balance. And so we have a sort of, by default, we sort of split people across two projects. But I think most of the projects are large enough that we can assign, if we can assign one RSE to a project, and that is what they prefer to do. We try to do that. But yeah, it is a tricky one. I think, again, providing the tools to help them manage their time and their tasks effectively as well is useful. We were subjected to agile training last year, some of which I think was quite helpful. I'm not against agile, by the way. Agile, by the way. Sorry, okay.
It wasn't the way I was expecting that sentence to end. We started with subjected to. Any advice for dealing with non-work related stressors, issues outside of work impacting your productivity at work, which leads to more stress and make it harder to deal with the other issues?
Yeah, I think there are certainly things that you can do to help create this sort of divide between work and home life. I'm always someone who has worked from home. I used to work from home 1 or 2 days a week even before the pandemic, but even I struggled during lockdown with being at home all the time, particularly with everything else that was going on. I found that having that, so I do like going into the office because it then gives you that clear divide. But also when I was during lockdown, I would get up and I would walk to work by just sort of going around the block, getting some fresh air before I then sat down to start working, and then at the end of the day, sort of walk home from work again, going out and getting fresh air. So there's a clear sort of delineation between home life and work life and maintaining that life work balance. I think that's critical. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks. We've got time for at least one more. This is a question not only for Mike, but also the community, I guess. Do we feel comfortable talking about the tricky parts? My mental health has been way worse recently, especially with business as usual expectations during a genocide, increase in anti-immigrant and transphobic sentiment. 1/2, it says, so I guess we only have 1 out of 2 here.
Again, it is really, really difficult to maintain with everything that is going on in the world right now. I have not necessarily completely stopped engaging with the news altogether, but at least sort of changed my media diet a bit. So I spend less time deliberately checking news websites and a little bit more time watching things that make me feel a bit more optimistic about the future. There's quite a lot of channels that talk about science and technology, talking about all this sort of green technology that we're working on, which does at least something about the sort of climate worries. But yeah, that's a really hard question to answer. I'm not sure I have all the answers yet, but hopefully we can solicit some from other people as well.
It's probably real. Okay, we'll do one more. More thanks. And yeah, I agree. It's a brave thing to do, to come here and talk like this, and I really appreciate it.
Being an anxious person talking to a room full of people about my anxiety is fun.
I've also found that upon returning to work, it's been suggested that I'm also responsible for the lack of resilience to my absence. How best to deal with management when sport is not forthcoming? I predicted this question. The main conclusions that I've come to so far in my sort of travels is that looking after yourself and doing self-care is critically important. It's one thing that we as individuals can really take control of. And so I want to provide people the tools to do that, but I'm also trying to make an effort to talk to leaders and line manager, because your boss is probably the biggest thing that has an impact on your mental health, particularly at work. My sort of general advice for dealing with people who are difficult is to try and find ways around them. Which is why, again, we're trying to link to the other sources of help, like mental health first aiders, like one of the advantages of the employee assistance program is that you can self-refer your line manager. It doesn't have to be involved. There are people in occupational health you could probably contact who might be able to make changes to support you in the workplace, but that often requires referral from your line manager. It's a bit more tricky, but they're not necessarily the only person that has control over your destiny. So thank you, Mike. And you mentioned those flyers, right?
Yes.
On the SSI
and society stance, if you want to.
Thank you again, Mike. Thanks for everybody for all the great questions, and thanks to the other speakers in this session as well. See you in the break.